Welcome to the Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. Larry is the author of over 40 books, the founder of Dove International, a worldwide family of churches and ministries in 6 continents, and has over 50 years of leadership experience. He and his guests will share inspirational leadership insights from their journey with God. These insights, gleaned from serving leaders in many nations, will transform your life and leadership. For more information on Larry's books and resources, visit LarryKreider.com.
Larry Kreider here with the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast. Today with my long-term friend, Pastor Sam Smucker, Lancaster County. God bless you, man. It's so good to have you here.
Yeah, good to be with you, Larry. We go way back.
We go way back.
1977.
I remember you were just this young pastor I heard of, starting this church called the Worship Center way back in the day. Maybe you met, I think, in Lititz Recreation Center.
Well, first we met at a place called Sheridan, Conestoga.
That's right.
For a year, and then we went to Lititz Rec Center for 3 years. But in right there at the beginning is when I met you. You were in that youth movement.
I was.
Called Rhema.
You remember that?
Oh, yeah. Rhema Youth Movement,
oh, yeah,
right?
Sure was.
And, of course, we went to Rhema Bible Training Center.
That's right.
So I'm thinking, is he a Rhema guy? And so we met, and I think soon after that is when we started having prayer times together.
Yeah.
And then invited other leaders and things like that.
I remember, we went to a restaurant one day, and we were both young pastors, and it was the Leola family restaurant, remember that? And we said, do you think it's possible pastors could pray together?
Yeah.
And we just said, well, it hasn't worked much in the past, but maybe we can try it.
Leola Family Restaurant. We used to call that Worship Center East.
Is that right? Because all the people from Worship Center were there.
Well, not only that, we had lots of our meetings there and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then we started our prayer meeting right there downstairs, right?
We did.
Yeah.
And that was amazing how God used it for years and years and years.
Yeah.
I remember we said we're going to keep it really pure. No one comes with their agenda. Yeah. Remember that? We're coming to pray, fellowship, and believe God for revival.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Sam, I'm so glad you're with us. You and I and 2 of our friends wrote this book together called Straight Talk to Leaders. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. It's been really fun. In fact, I remember when we were having a prayer meeting at the Worship Center, and I remember I said, can I talk to you guys for a few minutes, the 4 of us, and went over to your office, and we talked about writing this book, about things that we learned over the years about leadership. And I remember you said, well, I'd even read a book like that. So we'll talk more about that later. And years ago, you and I wrote a book on Fruit of the Spirit. It was really fun giving some of our stories on that. But let's just talk about things you learned about leadership over the years. Let's talk way back. You grew up Amish. You've told me some of the stories. Talk about that.
Yeah, I did. Grew up in a Amish family in Lancaster County. And, we had, I'm the oldest of 12.
Yeah.
And, I grew up on a farm and learned to work hard and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So Amish background to, and you said Rhema Bible College. How did that all happen? Had you come to Christ in that? How did that happen in the Amish tradition?
Yeah. When Amish young people turn 16,
right, they
kind of get this badge of freedom or feel like they have this badge of freedom, and that was me. And so I went the wild way for quite a few years.
Okay,
actually 8 years.
Wow.
And but then right in the middle of that, got married to Sherlyn Souter. And
she was Mennonite, right?
Yeah, went to Stumptown Mennonite Church because my parents pleaded with me to go to church when I left the Amish, and because church attendance to the Amish people was really important.
Sure.
But I wasn't committed to Christ or anything.
Right.
I just went, and then I saw the girls there, and then I liked the place because I saw the girls there, and that's where I met Sherlyn. And we got married in 1968, and then moved to Phoenix, Arizona, for our 1W service.
Okay.
And but my life was a mess out there. Really a mess, and so I worked at a hospital and got involved in their parties and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But Sherlyn never went with me.
Okay.
So the first 4 years of our marriage were not good.
Okay.
And but all this time I went to church.
Really?
I went to a Mennonite church. I was the head usher. Imagine that.
Oh, my goodness.
Imagine that. They didn't have any discernment whatsoever. I had a head usher. So on Saturday night, I was out partying, and Sunday morning, I was the head usher.
That is amazing.
Yeah, and then, but then one Sunday, there was this group of young people that came called the Agape Players. And I was like, these guys are different, because that church was kind of dead, you know?
Right.
And I hope they're not hearing me say that. But so, but there was something different. And I said to Cheryl, and I said, I think I like that. And so we followed them around Phoenix for a couple of nights, because they were ministering other places. And they had altar calls, which we weren't used to.
Right.
And in the altar call, man, I'd start to sweat, and I'd start to shake. And then one night, Sherilyn said, I'm going to go up and rededicate my life. So I followed her up there, and that's when I gave my life to Christ. Cool. That was in February of 1972.
Wow.
Yeah.
You and I have that in common, you know. It's because of my wife that I really gave my life totally to Christ, and Sherilyn kind of led the way for you in a lot of ways. That is amazing. So, I mean, it's interesting. You have this leadership call in your life. You're an usher even before you were
a head usher.
Soundly saved.
Yeah. That
is crazy.
And then after, but you know, as a little kid, I always felt like called to preach. As
really?
a little
Talk
kid.
to me about that.
Yeah, at age 11.
Really?
Yeah. We used to, Amish people have church every other week, as you know.
Yes.
And so the week in between, my dad would always make us have Sunday school.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if everybody did that, probably not. But my dad was always a little more spiritual minded.
Sure.
And I felt than other people, other Amish people. And then we would play church, and I'd always be the preacher, you know. So one day, my grandfather came over. He lived in the other end of the house, in my grandmother.
Sure.
He sat in when I was preaching. And afterward, he said, fly some dog, was du en Brediha.
What does that mean?
That's Pennsylvania Dutch. He said, maybe someday you'll be a preacher.
Oh.
So when I started running around in Rumspringa, and I started going the wild way, I'd always hear those words.
Interesting.
You know? Yeah. Fly some dog, was du en Brediha. Maybe someday you'll be a preacher. So no matter how drunk I was, I'd hear those words.
Amazing.
Yeah. So then after I got saved in Phoenix, I thought, man, what am I going to do with that? You know, because Amish people are not allowed to go to high school, not allowed to go to college. So I had 8th grade education, that's it. And so then we found this school, Bible school, where you didn't need a high school diploma.
Okay.
And so I said to Sherilyn, that's where we're going. And so we packed up our 2 little girls.
And that was Rhema.
That was Rhema.
And you knew almost nothing about it?
I didn't.
Really?
I didn't, no. But 7 of us had gotten baptized in the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And we had started a Bible study in southern Lancaster County.
Sure.
That grew to about 100 people. And so that's where somebody handed me a Word of Faith magazine. And in there was a little article about Rhema Bible Training Center starting up. And it had, in fine print, no high school diploma needed. And I said to Sherilyn, I said, that's it. That's where we're going.
That's amazing.
So we went. It was only 9-month school. And so about the 8th month, I said to Sherilyn, what are we going to do? Just go back and hang drywall? Is that what I'm going to do? Because that's what I did. But Sherilyn would always say, she'd always say this, we will have a place to minister. So when I said that day, in April of 1977, I said that to her. She says, we will have a place to minister.
Wow.
And I said, okay. So a couple of days later is when we were contacted by somebody from back here.
Really?
And said, there's a small group of people back here that would like to start a church. Do you want to be the pastor? Come back and be the pastor? I said, no, I don't think so. Because I thought I'd be an evangelist, like, I don't know who, but. But then, you know, it's just restless. And I said, okay, let's go. So beginning of June 1977, came back and started Worship Center. And the rest is history.
The rest is history.
The rest is history.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
So what are some leadership stuff you learned early on? You know, you started the Worship Center and, you know, obviously became a mega church, one of the most well-known churches in our whole region. Now you've reached over 100 nations of the world. I mean, it's amazing what God has done. Mm-hmm. But back in those days, those early days, you know, talk to us about your leadership journey there. What was that like?
I don't know. Because when I saw that question, I'm thinking, you know, back then we didn't have John Maxwell,
right?
21 Laws of Leadership.
Yeah, right.
I didn't have any of that. We we just started.
Yeah.
And I just started preaching the word. You know that.
That's how you did the same thing.
We just started, and what leadership lessons? I don't know. They just kind of
happened.
Kind of had to carve them out yourself.
Yeah.
And learn with hard knocks, I guess, or whatever.
Yeah. Well, are there things you look back now, you say, I would have done that differently? As you look back in those early days?
Maybe not. I would never. I enjoyed the learning lessons.
Yeah.
I do remember. I remember one thing. Cliff Martin, who's now with the Lord,
sure,
was the first associate pastor of Worship Center, and I'm a go-getter, and Cliff is laid back.
Right.
So I always expected people to know what they're supposed to do. I didn't know I was supposed to lay out expectations.
That's a great leadership lesson.
Yeah. And so Cliff came up to me one day after he was there for probably 6 months.
Yeah.
And he said, Pastor Sam, can I talk to you? And I said, sure. And he come into my office and he said, I'll never forget this. He said, what am I really supposed to do? and I was surprised because I carved out what I did. You carved out what you did.
You're right.
And I thought he would too.
Right.
But he didn't.
Right.
And so different leadership styles and so I learned that you have to put out expectations.
Right.
What you expect of people that are working with you.
And, I think also, Pastor Sam, we both learned this whole thing at the same time. I thought everyone thought like me.
Yeah.
I'm sure you did too.
Right, exactly.
You just assume that everyone thinks like we think, and it's just not the case. And we need to lay out this. If you're the primary leader, then we need to lay out a lot of the structures that are needed, a lot of the path that's needed for other people, so they can find their role in this plan.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about that. When we went to Rhema, we learned doctrinal stuff, and charismatic stuff, but we never learned much practical stuff.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
And so we were pretty green when we came back.
Yeah.
And just started preaching our notes. That's what I did. Started preaching my notes that I took in the classroom. And to our surprise, Sherlyn and I were the most surprised. People started to come.
Yeah.
Week after week, people were coming by the dozens.
Right. I remember the days.
And I'm like, what is going on here? But back then, Larry, it was like a revival going on. In this area even.
It was. I talked to someone recently, just a couple of days ago, who experienced that with all of us. And they look back, they said, we didn't even know it. God was moving sovereignly. There was a revival. We didn't even know it was happening. We just saw this is just normal stuff.
Yeah.
But it was just God moving.
There was in a revival, as you know, a lot of people are hungry.
Yes.
And they don't always know what they're hungry for, but they're hungry for God. And when that started to happen, people like your ministry and our ministry, people were just hungry for the things of the Spirit.
Yeah.
And that was amazing how that happened back then.
Yeah, I remember when you had the building, you're in the building in Leola, and somebody in our church gave us these big billboards, free billboards, come worship Jesus with us for Dove Christian Fellowship in those days. And they put one right next to the worship center, I remember. And you saw me the next time and you said, I'm going to put a big sign on there that says, come worship with us, and pointing right into the worship center. We had no idea where they're going to be,
Right.
We've had a lot of fun over the years.
You talk about leadership lessons. Another thing I learned is, as I look back, I was task oriented.
Yeah.
And I could walk by you and not even acknowledge you.
It's the way you're wired.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And looking back, I thought, man, I should have been much more appreciative of people working with me.
Me too.
I just expected them to do what they're told to do or whatever.
Right.
And, somebody came to me one time, Mel Hurst, actually, he's now with the Lord. And he said, Pastor Sam, do you ever say thank you? I said, probably not enough, Mel. So looking back, just task-oriented and not recognizing and appreciating people that are working with you.
Right.
Or people in general, just not being appreciative enough.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk to you about some of these leadership lessons that you've even written in the book that we did together. Mm-hmm. And just for everyone listening, for 5 days on Amazon, here's what we're going to do. We're going to offer this. It's Straight Talk to Leaders ebook. We're going to offer it free on Amazon for 5 days, and we'll talk more about this. It'll all be in the show notes. You can check that out later. But I've heard you speak on leadership various times, and I've every time so blessed. You teach in our school. remember, it's just been a joy to work together over these years. Remember, you had a leadership school and I teach in your school, and we just, kind of help each other with, other leaders in the area. But I want to just ask you just to expound on some things that you've learned. And one of the lessons, my favorite, you've taught this to our leaders, I've heard you share it various times, is keeping your eyes on the fence post. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about that. Explain that story and how that applies to leadership. And again, younger leaders listening, you say, well, I have no experience in leadership. We've all carved things out as the Holy Spirit led us, and God's been faithful. But we made some mistakes, but we prefer the next generation can learn from our mistakes. Mm-hmm. And that's why we wrote the book, and it's now been translated in various languages. It's been really fun watching God use this. But talk to me about that. Talk to me about that one story and that one truth that really helped you in leadership.
Working on a farm.
Yeah.
The most important part in working in the fields was plowing. Yeah. So one day I was probably about 12, 13. My dad said, I'm going to teach you how to plow today. I'm thinking, whoa, that's the big deal.
Yeah.
And so he said, all right, let's hook up Dick and Pete and Jack and Jewel. That was the name of the mules. We didn't have a tractor, And sometimes I'd be out in the field, Larry, and it'd be a hot summer day.
Yeah.
And I'd be out there daydreaming and thinking, what is wrong with a tractor? I would say that to myself, But anyway, we had these 4 mules. And so he said, let's get them out. So we went out in the field. And then he said, if we're going to do this right, this was a 20-acre field, and we have a one-bottom plow.
Right.
One furrow at a time.
Right.
One furrow at a time.
One big field that takes a long time.
And I looked at this 20-acre field, and I'm like, this is So my dad said, to do this right, the first furrow has to be straight. I said, okay. And then he said, see that post at the end of the field? Saying shella pushta, that means see that post at the end of the field? I said, yep. He said, now you keep your eye on that post. And don't look right, don't look left, don't look back, don't look down, don't even look at the mules, just at the post.
Yeah.
I said, okay. And so I stood up. We had a little platform on the plow, and I stood up. I was like 12 years old, and those reins were heavy, and those 4 mules. I said, all right, Dick and Pete, let's go. And so I kept my eye on the fence post all the way out to the end, and I looked back, and man, that thing was straight. I mean, my dad was proud.
Yeah.
I was proud. I think even the mules were proud. But I didn't realize that was a lesson at the time. But looking back, I thought, wow, he had some visionary things about him too.
Yeah.
My dad.
Yeah.
So I get emotional.
Yeah, it's good. It's awesome.
So I think through the years that has helped me, just stay focused. And if you look back the last couple of years, distractions. I mean, we're living in 2022, 2021, 2020. I mean, all the distractions. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many times I've taught that lesson, even during this time. Yeah. Stay focused, as a pastor, stay focused. People are going to try to distract you to this side and that side. And there's a lot of distractions in the ministry, especially in any area of the ministry. So that was a lesson that has stuck with me for many, many years. And I remember when we went through the transition that Glenn Eshelman, our friend Glenn Eshelman from Sight and Sound, drew me a picture of that. Keep your eye on the fence post.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's an incredible picture. So so that's that story.
So as a leader then, if a younger leader is asking you, how does this help me in leadership? Mm-hmm. You're simply saying, you know what God's called you to do, and keep your eye on that and don't get distracted. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember our very first missions trip. We took 40 people when the church was about 200. And we went to Jamaica. We were introduced to a man there. And I've worked with him. He's now 90 years old and still ministering. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so we did a crusade. And he said, I want you to preach in a crusade. And then I said, okay. So that night, and I was just young, and that night I preached on the woman with the issue of blood for 20 minutes, and I ran out of stuff to say. And then he said, The next morning, he said, Pastor Sam, he said, swim in your own lane. I said, what? He said, swim in your own lane. He said, last night you were trying to be like me. Because after I preached, I had an altar call when I ran out of stuff to say, and about 20 people came. And then he preached for 10 minutes and hundreds of people came.
Yeah.
I was totally dejected. And so he said, swim in your own lane. And so that's a lesson for young leaders today. You got to swim in your own, you got to do what you're called to do and stay focused on that.
Good.
You know,
So good.
And don't try to be strong in every area. I used to think I had to be strong in every area. You can't be strong in every area.
That's right.
If you try to be strong in every area, you're not going to be strong in any area.
True.
And so, stay focused on the fence post. Stay in your own lane. Spend, like John Maxwell says, spend 80% of your time on your strengths.
Right.
And 20% of your time on your weaknesses. So those are two very things that have just guided me.
Yeah, so you look back in your life and you realize, had you done more of that early on, it would have helped you earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As years go by, Larry, you mellow.
You do.
You just start to be more compassionate.
Yeah.
I wasn't very compassionate at the beginning.
You're always nice to me, Sam.
Well, I know, but I'd walk right by somebody on a Sunday morning, and they'd think I was mad at them because I didn't say hi.
Yeah.
So looking back, I was thinking, man, we were arrogant, is what you were.
Yeah.
And you look back at those kind of things.
You do. And it's important, I think, for people who are connecting with us here from many, many nations of the world, many continents. Yeah. And just so people don't know who you are, you've pastored for many years the worship center. Talk about that what happened there, and then what you're doing now, because you went through a succession. We can talk more about that at a later time, but just give a little feel of the things that God's used you to do, just so people know. And we want to put all this on our show notes and stuff, so if people want to get a hold of you, they can get a hold of you. Worship Center Ministries, and whatever other realm you have. Talk about that a little bit, will you?
Well, from the get-go at Worship Center, we wanted to do three things. Number one was the Word. When we went to Rhema Bible College, there was such a huge emphasis on the Word.
Yeah.
Preach the Word. And so that I came back with that.
Sure.
And even though it was only 9 months, that was drilled into us by our instructors out there, drilled into us. And so I wanted to help people build their lives on the Word. That's what I wanted to do. That was number one.
Worship Center's been known for that for years. Yeah.
That's number one. Second, I wanted community. I wanted small groups. And you helped me with that too, because at the beginning I didn't really believe that much in it, but I wanted community though. I wanted a family feel in the church. And I got to tell a story about you. I remember one time we went to lunch, and Don Neff and you and me and I think one other person, maybe somebody that you brought along, and we were talking about small groups, and you looked at me and you said, Pastor Sam, I don't think you really believe in doing that, do you?
Is that what I said? Yeah. I don't remember that.
Yeah. And it made me mad at the time. I thought, what right does he have to say that to me? But it was true. It was true. I wanted small groups, but I didn't even like them.
Yeah.
So as a leader, you can't really build something in your church unless you believe in it.
Exactly. And now that's a good leadership lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah, so true.
So you and some of us went to Dr. Cho's church growth conference.
You opened the door for us to go with you. I remember that.
And that was all about cell groups.
It was.
Back then they called them cell groups. Did. And a lot of different names through the years. But that's how it really, and I saw the evangelism component to small groups that really changed my view of them.
Got it.
I said, it's not just 12 people having a little party every week.
Right.
This is we're going to reach out into our community, and so that changed it for me. And then the third component was the Word and community and missions. I wanted us to have a missions-minded church from the beginning.
And you sure have.
Yeah. So that's what we called our three-legged stool, and that's what we're still, even today, even after transition, it's still strong. those three areas.
Now, you mentioned missions. Just give us a little example of that. You've been all over the world. You have friends all over the world. Worship Center is connected with, I think, more than 100 countries. Is that right?
Yeah, about 120.
That's amazing. Amazing. And so you've ministered in like India and so many different nations.
Yeah.
Are there any key nations that you look back you really connected with?
India is my favorite nation to go to.
Is it?
Yeah, I love all the chaos. I love going there. But I haven't been there now for a couple of years.
Right.
But I love going there. And I mean, I don't really know how that started, except one day at a chapel in Bible school we had T.L. Osborne. You know that name?
Oh, sure. I heard him speak already.
Yeah. And when
simple
he spoke,
evangelistic message,
so
powerful,
simple,
so
but
powerful. Yeah.
And when he spoke that day, it was like his words were tangible, and the whole student body started to weep. You know, I started to weep, and I looked around and I'm thinking, and people were weeping.
Wow.
You know, so on the way home, I was still weeping for that morning after class, and I said to Sherlyn, "What are we weeping?" She said, "I don't know what we're weeping about." But there was an impartation, probably the strongest one I ever felt. I mean, there's, you know, when people pray for you have impartation, but that day, it was like powerful,
right?
Really powerful, and I think that impartation caused us to have a heart for the world, or the heart for the lost, or whatever you want to call it. But I didn't know where it would take us. I had no idea, you know, but I knew from that time on that if we're going to pastor a church, it's going to be a missions-minded church, whatever that means.
Right.
And so when we started the church, we got introduced to various people around the world, and just supernaturally things started to happen. And then I thought, if we're going to have a missions-minded church, I have to go too.
Yeah.
Not just send people. I got to go and see the world. And so we did, you know, and I've traveled. You've probably traveled to more nations than I have. I've traveled to like 54, I think.
Yeah.
Nations.
I've lost count. I'm not sure how many it's been.
And so it just started to happen. And so now we don't have a missionary living in those 120 nations. But we might have a missionary, like, for example, we have a guy living in Kenya that reaches out to 9 other nations.
Right.
So when you take all that,
right,
that's where the 120 nations come in.
Beautiful.
We have a tentacle of ministry
through
our missionaries.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's how that's built through the years.
And there's so much more I want to ask you, and I'm going to have you back for another podcast. But years back, I remember you had done some teaching on the fruit of the Spirit, and I had done some teaching on the fruit of the Spirit. And we got together one day and said, let's just combine what we learned. There's so little written about that. We wrote this book, Growing the Fruit of the Spirit. And anybody who wants that, you can get that on Amazon. You can get that, check out the show notes, or you can get that through our bookstore. Either way. But I really want to focus here on Straight Talk to Leaders. Now, I want to talk to you a lot more about it. There's so much in it that you've written and impartation you have I want you to share with younger leaders. But 4 of us, Barry Whistler, Lester Zimmerman, Sam Smucker, Larry Kreider, but friends for years is interesting, right here in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and been friends for years. We've prayed for each other, stood together, you know, after all these years. Today, all of us lead global networks of churches.
Yeah.
All of us, in fact, all of us have gone through, you know, succession from being senior pastors of churches to leading networks of church, the Hopewell Network, obviously the Worship Center Ministries and all that you do with Rhema, and HarvestNet with Barry and Devon International with myself. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk more about that when we come back together. Now, let me, before we sign off today, and again, check out the show notes, all this information on the show notes. You want to get a hold of Pastor Sam, his ministries. Talk to us a little bit about Worship Center Ministries, and talk to us a little bit about your involvement with Rhema today, because you're constantly ministering to leaders, preaching, mentoring, and that's what you do today. Talk about that. Yeah,
we have. Worship Center has grown into a network of churches and ministries, not a real big one. So Sherlyn and I oversee that after we transition out of the lead pastor role 4.5 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you questions about that on our next podcast, about how that happened.
Okay, and then we also serve as a regional director for Rhema Ministerial Association International in the Northeast.
Okay.
And that has about 100 churches in the Northeast. Mm-hmm. So That's what we're doing now, yes.
Okay. So Straight Talk to Leaders, this book has been translated into various languages, is available on Amazon, it's available in the Denver International Bookstore. But we have this deal for you for 5 days on Amazon. We're offering Straight Talk to Leaders by Sam Smucker, Barry Whistler, Lester Zerman, Larry Kreider. And the ebook is going to be free on Amazon for 5 days. And again, check out the show notes; it'll all be there, and you can receive your free copy. One more question for you, and before we sign off today, Pastor Sam, if someone, a younger leader, comes to you and says, I'm a young leader, and man, I just love your story. I love what God's done with you. And you were to give him just one piece of advice. You say, just tell me, what's one thing that would really help me just fulfill the call of God that's on my life? What would it be?
I think you have to know what you're called to, and then you have to have a relationship with Jesus to let that call come through. You can't just go on the call.
Right.
The call is fueled by your relationship with Jesus.
Correct.
And the call is an overall thing. Within the call, then you have steps of vision.
Yes. Yeah, that's so good, so good. It's all back to Jesus. It's all back to our relationship with the Lord, and then being clear about the call and having steps to fulfill the call. Wonderful, awesome. We're going to have you back. Thank you, Pastor Sam Smucker, for joining me today. Again, check out the show notes and check out get your free ebook for 5 days, and the show notes will tell you how to do that. Straight Talk to Leaders. And Pastor Sam, thank you again for being on the podcast, Leadership Podcast, with me today. Thank you.
My privilege.
And we'll have you back. God bless you all. And here on the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast, we find those small things we can change in our lives that cause a huge difference in leadership to help many, many people for the glory of God. We want to see the kingdom of God continue to grow. So God bless you, and look forward to connecting with you again real soon.
Thank you for listening to Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. If you want more information about any of Larry's books, daily devotionals, small group resources, or any other teachings, go to LarryKreider.com.